Darren Shaw. That's a name you'd hear, and you'd instantly know something was about to go down. This wasn't just any cop patrolling Meadowtown. Darren had a certain approach to keeping order. He was the type that made it clear he ran the streets. But lurking under that authority was something twisted, something that had a real dark edge. Darren's attitude wasn't just tough, it was dangerous, especially for those he chose to single out. On a scorching day in August, Maya Jenkins was out on her usual errands, moving a little slower than usual because, well, she was 7 months pregnant. Her belly was round. Her face was radiant with the glow of impending motherhood, but her spirit was the same, strong, proud, determined. She just finished loading up her groceries and was about to hop into her car when she caught sight of a police cruiser pulling into the lot. She wasn't concerned. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. But the tension rose quickly as Darren Shaw stepped out of the vehicle. "You there?" His voice cracked through the heat like a whip. Maya turned, wondering what he could possibly want. Her heart pounded. Who wouldn't feel uneasy with that tone? The way he walked, the way his hand hovered near his belt, it all screamed trouble. Without missing a beat, Darren stormed up to Maya, eyes flashing with something she recognized right away. Suspicion mixed with pure hostility. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his tone sharp, as if her very presence was some kind of offense. Maya straightened up, masking her unease. "I'm loading my groceries into my car," she replied, voice steady. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. But in her gut, she knew this wasn't a simple question. He'd already decided she was guilty of something. Darren tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Got a call about a suspicious person matching your description," he said. "So let's cut the excuses. Been lifting anything that doesn't belong to you?" Maya's mouth dropped. "Stealing?" She held up her bag. "I paid for everything." But Darren's expression didn't change, and she knew he didn't believe her. He didn't care what she had to say. "Then show me your receipt," he barked, crossing his arms, as if challenging her to prove him wrong. Her hands trembled as she searched through her purse, heart racing. She could feel the weight of his gaze, sharp and accusing. When she found the receipt and handed it over, he barely glanced at it before tossing it aside with a sneer. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he muttered, stepping closer, crowding her space. Maya instinctively backed up, her pulse quickening. She glanced around the parking lot, hoping someone might intervene, but people were just starting to take notice, heads turning to watch from a distance. "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice firm but wary. "I'm just trying to get home." But Darren wasn't listening. With a sudden, brutal motion, he grabbed her arm, his grip so tight that she winced in pain. "Look, I don't care if you're pregnant," he sneered, voice cold as stone. "You're coming with me?" Maya's heart thundered. "Please don't," but before she could finish, Darren forced her against her car, pinning her arm behind her back. Her belly pressed painfully into the door, and she cried out, but he only tightened his grip. "Stop resisting," he snapped, twisting her arm harder. Tears sprang to her eyes as she pleaded, "I'm not resisting. Please, I'm pregnant." But he didn't listen. He shoved her, and with a sickening thud, his fist struck her side. She gasped, clutching her stomach protectively. Fear coursed through her as she thought about her baby. Her precious child she'd done everything to protect. She collapsed to the ground, struggling to breathe, pain radiating through her. The world spun, but all she could think of was her child, hoping, praying that everything was okay. Around her, a crowd had started to gather, their shocked faces and raised phones capturing the horror of what was happening. Some shouted at Darren, pleading with him to stop, but he ignored them, his focus solely on Maya. He reached for his handcuffs, muttering, "You're under arrest," as if she'd committed some terrible crime. In a desperate voice, Maya managed to whisper, "Why are you doing this?" Before Darren could answer, a sound cut through the air, a loud screeching of tires. A sleek, black car whipped into the parking lot and stopped just feet away from them. Out stepped a tall, imposing man in a tailored suit, and the rage on his face was unmistakable. He looked ready to tear the world apart. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice booming across the lot. Darren barely glanced at him, dismissing him as if he were just another bystander. "Step back," Darren warned, his hand twitching toward his holster. Police business. But the man took a step forward, his gaze never leaving Maya, still crumpled on the ground, clutching her stomach. Recognition flashed across his face, and fury overtook him. "That's my daughter," he roared, voice trembling with rage. Darren froze, the weight of those words sinking in. His hand, halfway to his cuffs, hung in the air as he stared at the man in front of him. "What?" he stammered, confusion and fear mingling on his face. The man didn't wait for an explanation. He rushed to Maya's side, kneeling down, his voice suddenly soft with concern. "Maya, honey, are you okay?" His hand gently brushed her cheek, a father's protective touch. "Dad," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It hurts." Darren paled. He knew exactly who he was dealing with now. This was Richard Jenkins, a man whose influence stretched far beyond the borders of Meadowtown. Jenkins wasn't just powerful. He was practically untouchable, with connections that ran deep in both the legal and political worlds. Darren could feel his own world slipping away, crumbling under the weight of the moment. "I didn't know," he stammered, taking a step back, his bravado melting into fear. Jenkins stood, towering over him, and the sheer force of his anger was like a thunderstorm. "You didn't know?" Jenkins growled, his voice dangerous. "You just assaulted my pregnant daughter, and you didn't know?" Darren fumbled for words, but Jenkins didn't let him continue. "She was suspicious, that's it, right?" Jenkins's voice dripped with sarcasm, cutting through Darren's excuses like a knife. "You did this because she's black, didn't you?" Jenkins demanded, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. The crowd was silent, the weight of truth hanging in the air. Darren's mouth opened, but no words came out. He was trapped, his own actions laid bare for everyone to see. Without breaking his gaze, Jenkins pulled out his phone and made a single curt call. Within minutes, several squad cars rolled into the lot, their lights flashing. But these officers weren't here to support Darren. They were here to take him in. Darren's face turned ashen as he was led away in handcuffs, the reality sinking in. His career, his so-called reputation, everything had just gone up in flames. He'd become a symbol of everything people feared and resented about the system, and justice had finally come for him. As Maya was rushed to the hospital, the crowd that had gathered stayed behind, buzzing with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The video of the incident went viral within hours, sparking outrage and calls for change from every corner of the country. For Maya, the wounds would heal, and she'd be okay, but the scars would remain as a reminder of that day. And as for Darren Shaw, he'd become the face of everything wrong with Meadowtown's broken system, a symbol of corruption that at last had been taken down. Maya lay in her hospital bed, surrounded by family and friends who had come to support her. The baby was safe, but she was shaken, both physically and emotionally. She kept replaying the encounter in her mind, wondering how it all could have escalated so fast. The video of Darren Shaw's assault had exploded online, sparking outrage and protests in Meadowtown and beyond. What Darren thought would be a routine stop had turned into a battle cry for justice. Maya's father, Richard Jenkins, was now determined to ensure Darren Shaw faced real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist. As a businessman and a community leader, he had long campaigned for equality, pushing for change in the justice system. But now, it was personal. While Maya was recovering, Richard was strategizing. He held meetings with activists, legal experts, and local politicians who had seen too many cases like Maya's. They were tired of complaints falling on deaf ears, investigations that conveniently found nothing wrong. The people of Meadowtown had had enough. Richard promised that this time, they'd see real change. A week later, the case went to court. The media was everywhere, and people flooded the streets outside the courthouse, chanting Maya's name and holding signs demanding accountability. Inside, the courtroom was packed as the prosecution laid out the evidence against Darren Shaw. The prosecution wasted no time presenting the brutal footage, and Darren's face was a mask of regret, or perhaps fear, as he watched his actions play out on screen. Witness after witness took the stand. People from Meadowtown who shared stories of their own encounters with Darren, stories that echoed Maya's experience. his prejudice, his quickness to anger. It was all laid bare. But Darren's defense tried a familiar tactic: deflect and deny. They claimed he was under stress, that he had only been doing his job. They argued that the call he received described Maya as a suspicious individual, and he was simply responding to that. They painted him as an overworked officer, but the jury wasn't buying it. Not this time. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, the movement for reform was growing. People were organizing marches, holding community forums, and sharing their stories online. Maya's ordeal had galvanized the city, sparking a long-overdue conversation about police accountability, racial bias, and the need for systemic change. Maya, still healing, found herself becoming a reluctant leader. She spoke at rallies, encouraging others to stand up and demand justice, not only for herself but for everyone who had ever been mistreated. Her voice became a symbol of resilience, inspiring others to come forward with their stories. What she wanted more than anything was for her son to grow up in a world where he wouldn't have to fear people like Darren Shaw. In the end, the jury found Darren guilty of assault and abuse of power. As he was led out of the courtroom in cuffs, his head hung low, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He'd lost everything: his badge, his reputation, and any sense of authority he once wielded. But for Maya, the journey wasn't over. She knew that real change would take time and commitment, that there were others like Darren Shaw who hid behind their badges, unchecked and unaccountable. So she continued to speak, to organize, and to fight for reform. She became a leader in her community, dedicating her life to the cause, so no one else would have to endure what she had. The video of Darren's arrest continued to circulate online, a reminder of what had happened, and a warning of what could happen when people unite against injustice. It was a story Meadowtown wouldn't soon forget. It was the story of a town that came together, stood up, and demanded better. And though it had begun with one woman's nightmare, it ended with the community's dream for a safer, fairer world for all.